Welcome all to this webinar, Agile Planning in Volatile Times, a Reset. Welcome all people attending this webinar, as well as Lora as our guest speaker, and my colleague Jurgen. Jurgen, if you can go to the next slide, maybe a little bit on the agenda for today. So welcome and introduction. Main stage will be for Lora and Jurgen, where Lora will explain a little bit based on one of her analysis that she did on supply chains after the COVID. Then Jurgen will explain a little bit how that can be solved in a cloud-based planning tool, Pigment. And then it's back and forth between Lora and Jurgen a couple of times, in total about 40 minutes. And then we have plenty of room at the end for Q&A. So you all will be muted during the call, during this webinar. And any questions that you might have, there is on the left side, there is a panel where you can add different questions that you might have. In between, if there's any chat or question that we can answer in between, we will. And the remaining ones will be left open, unanswered until the end of the webinar, the Q&A. So a little introduction next to what is here on this slide. So my name is Jan Veerman, a long track record in the area of supply chain and the implementation of planning solutions, and one of the two founders of Planadigm. Planadigm is the new paradigm in planning. So within the company, over 30 plus years of supply chain expertise, over 20 plus years of implementing supply chain solutions. And with Planadigm, we have a full focus on supply chain implementations with Pigment. So as you will see later on, that we've built our own model based on this Pigment platform. But the Pigment platform can host several use cases like sales and marketing, finance, supply chain, HR. In the end, to be able to build a truly connected planning environment. So a change in one of your use cases, so for example in finance, can reflect a ripple down in your supply chain one, or vice versa. So like I said, in a few minutes you will start to see also what we've built in Pigment. So it's our own built supply chain demo model that has a forecasting engine, demand, supply and finance. So to be able to truly have this integrated business planning environment, and it's built based on best practices. So our long history track record on supply chain expertise, we've embedded that into that model, as well as the expertise we had on the implementing of planning platforms. Our employees, Planadigm Pigment, will be available as well as Lora during the Q&A to answer any questions that you might have. And there's one poll I want to start and get some feedback. So the poll should be open right now, if you can see it. To get some feedback from you to see and the question is your planning process agile enough to respond quickly to external events? And updates, you can make an update in very short time, 1 to 2 days, 3 to 5 days, or it even takes longer than 6 days. And I can see that the votes are coming in. And after the poll, let me then do a short introduction of my colleague Jurgen as well as Lora, and then we do a deep dive into the topic itself. So we'll close the poll and then do a short introduction of my colleague Jurgen. Jurgen is a planning expert at Planadigm. He has also a long track record in supply chain, implementing planning solutions. And he will be the one to perform the demo for you. And of course, the famous Lora, founder of Supply Chain Insights, since 2012, she is in charge of Supply Chain Insights. She's author of the blog Supply Chain Shaman. I think a couple of you will know this blog site where she posts on a regular basis very interesting articles. She is a regular contributor for Supply Chain Brain, the CIO magazine, and CSCMP Quarterly. And she focuses on the changing face of enterprise technologies for the supply chain professionals. And she has a very strong background in supply chain, and based on the previous roles she had in that business. So with that, Lora, I want to hand over to you to start with the webinar.
Well, thank you so much. And it's always fun to talk about supply chain with a global audience. So let's get started. Jurgen, if you want to start the slides. You know, we certainly have been in volatile times. The global supply chain assumed 3 assumptions that are no longer valid. One, that logistics would always be available and we just needed to focus on price. 2, that we would have rational government policy, which, you know, the world in front of us is becoming very fragmented and very fractured with supply shortages. And 3, that we would have low variability. And things like history would be a good predictor of demand. But what we have seen is that those 3 base assumptions of the global supply chain have really evaporated. And they've evaporated over the time of the pandemic, and they're even worse now. So even though people might say, well, haven't we returned to normal? No, we haven't. We have a freight recession in the United States. We've got lots of issues with war around the world. We've got a lot of sourcing issues, and people are struggling with how do I manage demand when history is no longer a good predictor of demand. Next slide, Jurgen. And so these assumptions are no longer valid. So what do? Well, many people depend upon S&OP to really drive horizontal alignment, because if we focus on functional metrics like OEE or lowest manufacturing cost or lowest procurement cost, or even demand error versus forecast value add, we throw the supply chain out of balance. And the supply chain is a complex nonlinear system that is easily thrown out of balance. And so as we think about sales and operations planning, and we think about the decline and the effectiveness of sales and operations planning, these assumptions that are no longer valid play here, but also the fact that we have adopted practices that don't serve us well. Things like collaborative demand planning, which people think, wow, wouldn't it be a great idea to get sales and marketing and operations in the same room and talk about what the demand plan is? And I used to think that too, until I measured the impact. And what you see is a decline in forecast value add. And forecast value add is something that I would encourage everyone to investigate, because it's a disciplined way that we can drive demand improvement. And 8 out of 9 companies that I work with have actually caused a decrease in forecast value add. And that's despite the fact that they've invested millions in systems and hundreds of planners. And in fact, you know, I have people that have 200 to 400 to 1,700 planners now over the course of 2 decades, and we're becoming more reactive and less proactive. So as we look at sales and operations planning and effectiveness, there's a need in many organizations to layer technologies on top of advanced planning or ERP, because our current systems are so hard to use and they don't have scenario planning to help us to manage that variability. So when you think about sales and operations planning, and I've done a lot of writing about this, when you're looking at effectiveness, the S and the OP should be balanced so that you get rid of politics. And you need to focus on the ampersand to really drive the right buffer in inventory, to be able to focus on form and function of inventory, and to be able to focus on design of the supply chain. Unfortunately, only 9% of companies actively design their supply chain, and for most, that's an opportunity. Jurgen, next slide. So S&OP effectiveness is declining. We also have the issue with inflation or recession. Price is not something that is in most of our advanced planning tools. And in fact, price management in a revenue optimization will sit at the side, really not connected to demand planning. So the need for additional technologies to layer on top of our current systems to look at what if analysis for volume versus price sensitivity, and to be able to look at variability as needed. Next slide, Jurgen. So Many people think, well, Laura, over 90% of companies invested in ERP and advanced planning, and don't we have the problem solved? And if you look at inventory, we've increased inventory 28 days across all industries. And when I talk about this, many times people are surprised, like, how did this happen? I focus on safety stock. But the issue is safety stock in a regional supply chain was about 45% of the inventory. And what we find in the global supply chain, safety stock is about 15% of inventory. So in our conventional approaches, we only focused on safety stock, and we didn't focus on the form and function of inventory. So let's talk next, Jurgen, on the next slide about the form and function of inventory, because the form of inventory is, do you hold it as a raw material or a finished good? And the function of inventory is looking at in-transit inventories, is looking at cycle stock and manufacturing, looking at seasonal and promoted items. And what is happening is that we are trying to drive growth strategies in supply chain without really aligning to market signals. And so, people want to make decisions on real-time data, and I want to exercise caution that planning is not real time, and S&OP, which this is a survey about S&OP, should really be focused on planning outside of lead time. However, there is an opportunity for us to improve our ability to reduce data latency through NoSQL on inventory, to have a real-time perpetual inventory signal, because many of my clients take 4 to 6 hours to roll up an inventory signal, or to be able to look at NoSQL to be able to bring in supplier data or transportation data. 80% of the data in the supply chain is not used because we're very focused on use of transactional data. The other thing that supply chain planning tools are very focused on is end-to-end visibility. So blue is the expectations, green is the reality, and you can see there's a big gap there on end-to-end visibility. And the reason is that we say we have end-to-end tools, but we really don't. DRP, or distribution requirements planning, has nothing in common with TMS or transportation management. And we don't have a good planning master data layer to allow us to look at what's happening in the markets. And additionally, we wanted systems that would help us to improve collaboration. But that's an issue too, because our systems today really focus on how we automate planners talking to planners, not necessarily planners talking to business leaders or other business leaders talking to each other. And then the response time for people to make a decision has increased, so that 4 to 6 weeks is usually the offset between the decision being made in sales and operations planning and what's happening in the market. So as we think about planning effectiveness, only 35% of people are satisfied with current planning implementations. And yeah, there's some implementation issues, but there are some base issues of how we define planning and what the needs are today. Things like safety stock is only 15% of inventory for a global supply chain, or the need to manage form and function of inventory, or the need to measure forecast value add. Jurgen, next slide. So we're going to do some demos along the way. This is an approach that Jurgen has been working with Pigment on for an overlay to help people with ease of use for S&OP. So Jurgen, I'm going to go on mute here.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And indeed, what Jan has said during the introduction is that we built from Planadigm our own S&OP model above the platform of Pigment. And what you will see in here, I'm already in Pigment, is that especially on the collaboration side, what Laura just mentioned is especially here the big advantage. So you see here, for example, different demo applications, for example, HR, finance, maybe marketing, statistical forecasting, but you can also think about maybe procurement, production, or some other use cases that you have in your organizations. And this allows you to have within an application or within a platform to have the real end-to-end visibility, where all different silos or different departments can be connected to each other and share also data with each other. And that allows you to give you that collaboration part that gives also you that effectiveness in planning, where you can share the processes, align the process on each other. And that means that you have this one platform or one overlay of a platform that can rule your, let's say, end-to-end visibility. And so that also means that changes that you're doing in the financial aspect can be directly visible, for example, in the S&OP. Yeah, so think about if you change your sales price or cost price from a financial perspective, that you can directly use that in your planning for demand or supply side. In this case, we're focusing only for this webinar on the demand and the supply. So we're opening the sales and operations planning model. And what you will see, and maybe for a lot of you, is this a new platform that you will see. But on the left side, you see a couple of sections. So this model has a couple of sections where we can start from product planning. So think about the product introductions, think about also the end of life of products, but also maybe segmentations of products. So the ABC, XYZ axis, or maybe some specific alerts for products that drives or helps a demand planner or a supply planner to give the right focus on what they need to do within a platform. Then you have demand planning. So think about that you have in the demand planning, you have your sales plan for the account managers. Maybe you have your marketing contribution, so that you also directly see the impact of what if we add a marketing campaign and what if we can add there. How will that drive our final number? What will be the impact on our supply chain, but also what will be the impact of creating the demand? But also maybe customer collaboration, where you want to share the access to your customers, where customers can provide their forecast to you, where you have then the real insight, not only internally, but also externally from external events. And then in the end, you have your consensus demand, for example, where you then have all the figures together from your account managers, from marketing, maybe from your customer, and get a total consensus overview. Now, from there, in a normal process in here, you go into the supply planning, where you say, okay, how we can match our demand with our capacity that we can manage in here, like our assets or different resources like people. And that will give you or translate it all the way in the end to your financial part, where you have that IBP, where you have your demand supply, giving you financial overview to have a completely integrated business planning. So on all those sections, we have different boards. And in this case, as this webinar is also to show you, to showcase how it would work like in an application, is that in this example, we have a sales plan. So in a sales plan, what you can see is directly data, like the charts on, okay, how is our actuals flowing? How is our forecast? Maybe a statistical forecast that is generated for the system, or maybe a statistical forecast that is loaded into the system. And what you also see in here is directly a couple of options that I can choose from. So in here, I can select a certain scenario. So let's say we have our September 2003 plan. So that was our final result of the last cycle. Maybe we select a certain customer that we can select. So we have a possibility to multi-select potentially multiple customers, and I want to select a certain product in this example. And this model or this demo model is about drones. So it is just to give an example on how it would look like. And this is maybe a result that we had at our final on our previous plan. And so this was our final result. So we see in this case what the statistical forecast was, what for kind of enrichments or what we did in the case as a planner, and what our final sales plan was. So what we can do in here is then going into the next plan, we have then direct visibility. We don't have to go into different kind of reports. We can directly see, okay, what is the impact if I switch from plan A to plan B? And in here, I can then choose or say, okay, I'm going to chase a couple of numbers. So from a planning perspective, I have directly insight and I can chase numbers that are directly recalculated into the system. So that means that also on that part, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait that the system is progressing overnight. You see directly the impact coming back into your system. You see the charts directly changing according to what you are inputting. So for an end user perspective, you have directly insights. It's also the case when I change in a very high number, for example, or that I fill in my forecast, that it gives you insights. Okay, what does that do that with my complete plan? So you see directly the impact on, the planning that you do. And the advantage of a tool like this is that while I'm filling in a number on sales plan, it can directly translate this to your supply plan. It can directly decrease, let's say, your process latency, because other planners or your manager can directly have insights on what you're doing. And I can do this for multiple customers. I can do this for multiple regions. I can do this for multiple brands. And that gives you, in this case, what Lora has already mentioned in their part, is that the changes and the process latency or the effectiveness in the end-to-end visibility gives you a bit much more insights in this case. And I'm handing it over back to you, Lora, for now.
Well, thank you so much for the demo. I think that allows people to see the ease of use, that can happen with some of the newer technologies that can be overlaid on top of some of the more difficult technologies to use, because we need what-if analysis. And the reason we need what-if analysis is companies don't just have one flow, they typically have multiple flows. And so often people will say, I want to have an efficient supply chain. And I would agree, but that only really holds for about 20 to 30% of the product. The efficient supply chain is what's very predictable and very high volume. And so this has a coefficient of variation of like 0.3 to or under 0.5, but it is very easy to model. And then I have a need for the responsive supply chain, which is all about time, which is short cycles. And so as we think about efficient and responsive, those are very different objective functions in the supply chain. And the agile supply chain, which are very low volume products, which are not predictable, which are things like samples and new product launch. And so the need to model these flows differently is important in S&OP, and you need agile tools to do that. So let me give you a story about a company that I worked with, a manufacturer, and they made baby formula, and they had implemented a very hard to use technology for S&OP. And they wanted to get the baby formula in the hands of the new mothers in the hospitals. But because they were running all of their products as the efficient supply chain, really focused on the lowest cost, they were always shorting the samples, and they weren't able to get their product to the new mothers in the hospital. And that was the most important product, but because they weren't managing flows, they were not creating the growth that they needed. So thinking about the role of each supply chain flow and the modeling in S&OP requires flexibility in the tool. Next slide. And so companies have 2 to 3 flows. And one of the issues is that we don't talk about the definition of supply chain excellence enough. We don't talk about what is a good plan. You know, I laugh because often people are like, a good plan is just when it runs, right? But we really need to look at forecast value add and bias in the demand area, not error. I'm not a big fan of the APEs, the MAPEs, the WAPEs. MPE is better than the APEs. And we need to look at schedule adherence, first pass yield, supplier reliability, and then tie to a balanced scorecard. Because most organizations are struggling with alignment. And this is actually research I've done over the last 2 decades. And I find that misalignment has increased threefold as we've become more global, as we have more variability. And a large factor in this misalignment is the lack of clear definition of what is a good supply chain and how many flows do I have and what should be the output for each. So using a tool to show people the output of a responsive supply chain, the impact on time, an efficient supply chain, the impact on cost, an agile supply chain, the impact on customer service, helps us to close the gaps. Now, I am the most concerned about the gap that has grown between procurement and manufacturing, particularly in this time of tight supply, because the traditional advanced planning solutions only look at manufacturing as a constraint, and they assume that supply is always available, or the gap that I'm seeing between customer service and logistics, right? Because in the pandemic, the gap widened there because just of the sheer cost of logistics. So as you think about what Jurgen is showing you and kind of an easy to use technology that can go on top of current systems that can be run by the planner, think about how do you use tools like this to improve alignment and define supply chain excellence. So Jurgen, I think it's back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, and what you saw reflecting back is that when I filled in a very high number, especially on the demand side, and talking about the process latency, you see directly the impact also on the capacity planning point of view. So that means that while I'm giving a very high number for a specific plan, and let's take 2024, you see directly the impact. What does that do with my capacity? How do I have my over underutilization? Meaning that for the process, you don't have to first send it over to the supply chain department, need to wait, need to put in request, need to be recalculated overnight. You see what I'm changing has directly an impact in another part of the process. And that allows you to give directly the act or the possibility to act on the change that you do. One other thing is what you saw is when I filled in a very high number, I suddenly get also a notification. So in this case, what the system also, or the platform also allows you to do, or a tool allows you to do, is to notify, hey, you filled in a number where we have put in some certain constraints, and from there, I can click on this and again go to a kind of a reporting where I say, okay, I have a constraint where my customer, my product for a specific period, you had a certain constraint of X%, where you don't have to wait again to say, okay, you filled in a number that is too high. We cannot foresee that for whatever reason, that can be any business reason, and that you need to again wait another day before you get feedback. So a solution like this or the model like this can give you direct feedback on if you are above or under a certain threshold where you need to meet as a demand planner or maybe as a supply planner. So it can give you the follow-up action for that. And a tool like this can give you also the collaboration. So what we first talked about was the end-to-end insights, but it also gives you the possibility to say, I can right-click on a cell and say, I want to start a conversation with someone. So in this case, I can say, hey, Jan, this number is valid for any reason because of the maybe valid business reasons. So again, it decreases your process latency that you again need to send an email or need to wait over a day or maybe a couple of days before you get feedback on your plan. So a solution like this can give you direct feedback and decreases your process latency. And I will hand it over back to you, Laura, for the next part.
Well, and process latency is something I don't think we think long and hard enough about, right? So if you look at the combination of demand latency, which is the time to basically translate what's happening in the channel to an order, that is typically 4 to 6 weeks. And then we assume that the order is representative of demand, and we add an S&OP process on top of it, which is another 4 to 6 weeks, that the latency becomes substantially different than what's happening in the market. So the question that I always ask people is, don't you want to make decisions at the speed of the market? Not real time, right? Because real time introduces nervousness, but decisions at the speed of business, really understanding the many flows that you've got. And, you know, one of the big advantages of technology is improving visibility across stakeholders. And this is also something that I ask frequently in my quantitative research, and I use the 320,000 people that follow me on LinkedIn to do quantitative research. And the question is, do you have visibility? Do you have the data that you need when you need it? And you can see that enterprise visibility is a very large gap, even though we've invested in a lot of systems. And the reason is that we've tried to make functions very efficient, but really the supply chain is all about source, make, and deliver working together. And the team's able to see the data to make decisions on this thing that we call the complex nonlinear system called supply chain. And so the gap here can't really be solved by, back office systems that, the planning runs, once a month, and lack of scenario planning, and I can't get to data. So I would encourage you to look at alternative tools to improve flexibility, to close the gap between the green, which is effectiveness, and the blue, what people desire, because people can't get to the data that they need. So Jurgen, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And especially it's nice that you mentioned about the scenario planning part, because now I created a sales plan with some numbers that are not realistic. And what is very difficult in a lot of platforms is directly create a scenario. Normally you need to go back, something needs to be modeled, data needs to be reloaded in again, and from there you need to start again. And that takes time. So what this allows you to do now is that I can select a certain scenario that I have here, and I can say, okay, just generate for me a new scenario. And I can say what should be my source. So we were in the October 2003 plan, which of course is then again the final result of September. And in here I can say October 2023 scenario. And when I'm doing this, what it will do, it will create a scenario. So suddenly I'm now in my scenario part. So the ease, the quickness, how to easily create a scenario, it's almost instant, which is, I think, a very game changer if you're talking about the what if analysis, and give you the visibility and the analysis that you wanted to do and to play around with. And then in the end, what I can do is going back to that specific number that I filled in, the 20,000 units, and let's say I make a 5,000 or 1,000 units from it. And when I'm going in there, I want to see directly the results. So I see that my charge is already changing, but I want to also see, okay, what is the impact on that for my scenario based on the supply part, because it has a very big impact on my supply part. And what I can do is then say in here, okay, I have my October 2003 plan, I have my scenario, and give me my overview. So what I directly can see is on this side, I have my original plan that I filled in, and I have my scenario that I had. I can see the differences. I see suddenly that in November, where I had first a very big utilization, or I was overutilized because of the big demand that I had, suddenly I now okay with my utilization. So in this instance, it gives you the flexibility to go in creating a lot of different what if scenarios. And from here, I can create even a new scenario. So I can again say, I want to create a new scenario, which is starting of my current scenario. So you can create a lot of, let's say, connections to different scenarios to create a lot of what ifs analysis. And it gives you the very big flexibility and the power to to close the gap of what is important and what is also effective of what you wanted to have. So in the last slide that Lora showed. And this is not only, the scenario is not only in the supply part or in the supply planning part, but it is throughout the whole platform. That also means that if you create a what if analysis for marketing or for finance or maybe HR or think about maybe procurement, it gives you that flexibility where everyone can have then a scenario where it is connected, where you can sync your data and also align your businesses on a different scenario. That gives you the power and the flexibility to really focus and also act on events that are occurring in a very short time. Because if I say, okay, this was my scenario and let me just go to the sales plan. And I think, no, this is not what I wanted to have. I can then also have a very quick, easy to delete the scenario. So I say, don't want to have that scenario. And now I can go back and select my original plan. So that gives me my possibility to really have, from a business user perspective, because I think that is very key, that it is not an IT focused party, but that's really from a business user, or that the business is in control how they want to deal with scenarios and how they want to deal with events that are happening and that will drive their influence and their decision making. And I think this will represent correctly, and I think hopefully also a very nice way on aligning your process, Laura. So I will go back to you for the further part of your presentation.
Well, I'm going to just take the opportunity to answer a question. Jonathan, who reads my blog, which I always love talking to people that read my stuff. You know, when I sit every Sunday and I write a blog, I wonder, you know, who's reading it? And, you know, I love the interaction. He wants to know who does S&OP well. And, you know, interestingly, the companies that do S&OP well have 5 characteristics. Clear operating plan, which only 30% of companies have a clear operating plan and clear definition of supply chain. 2, they've got a clear vision of how product innovation ties to customers. So in companies like, you know, Sleep Number, where they're not selling beds, but they're selling sleep, there's a very good S&OP plan. Timber Sealy also. But you know, there's a tight linkage between product innovation and the delivery to the customer. 3rd is the ability to do scenario planning and have an aligned organization. 4 is clarity around supply chain excellence. And 5 is the focus of the functions on reliability. So often, you know, when I work with companies and I'll actually listen to their S&OP meetings, you know, I'm like, let's get back to the basics. What's a good plan? What's the role of the forecast? What's the role of the inventory? How do we know if we have a good plan and drive those results? So I hope that helps, Jonathan. Typically, they're regional companies. Typically, they're very strong on product innovation. And unfortunately, they're not the companies that I see on stage at most of the conferences, right? Most of the conferences have companies that are global with lots of political issues, and their technologies don't work very well. So, Jan, I hope you're okay that I just jumped in here. But, you know, many times, you know, the manufacturers and technologists chase RFPs, and we have this horrible tension in the market between, you know, how do we get the right stuff and technology to drive plans? And the RFPs that I see being written are really out of date with the technologies that are available. So I'd encourage you to test and learn on simple technologies. And don't take that wrong, Jurgen, but, you know, these are very easy to implement, much lower cost technologies that overlay on top of what are hard to use technologies. And, you know, the industry interest is great and technology advancements make this a possibility. But to really move forward on S&OP, we have to unlearn. We have to get past functional excellence, define supply chain excellence, and really drive that alignment. So I hope that helps. And Jan, you also had a question about S&OP talent, which is a huge issue. You know, I was writing a blog for a company that does supply chain talent. And I believe that we'll have a 40% shortage in S&OP talent by 2030 by the combination of retiring baby boomers and just frustration in the space, and also the growth of the number of planners. And so, you know, what's happening is, you know, the salaries are going up, but the expertise isn't necessarily going up. So I encourage people to really partner with local universities to build their own talent, because I just can't go to the market and get talent, and to be really clear on the role of planning, because it isn't to drive a reactive signal. It really needs to be proactive. So Jurgen and Jan, thanks for having me today. I hope that helped. Any questions that you have other than those?
There is also one other question from Jonathan, Laura, about as a follow-up, a system is one point, but why are more and more businesses unhappy with the results? What's the role and relative impact of organization and, more importantly, processes?
Well, Jonathan, they're not happy because they don't answer the basic questions of what's a good plan? What's the role of the forecast? How do I define supply chain excellence? How do I design the right buffers for inventory? And how am I doing, right? So we get caught in this cadence like a bad dance, right? Like a bad tango of, monthly meetings, and we don't really measure forecast value add. We don't really measure bias. We're not really thinking about the multiple supply chain flows, not thinking about, what drives supply chain excellence and educating the organization on that. Instead, most organizations are very political. They're as political as the news cycles have become globally, which is unfortunate because, I think supply chain is so essential to companies functioning well.
Yeah, one more question for me, Laura. Laura, do you see that after COVID, people are now, or companies are more stacking up inventory? So the level of inventory has gone up based on the event like that. They want to be more safe.
Well, that would assume that we are making conscious choice, which I don't think we do often. I think that we're reactive, and I think that sometimes people are stocking up on tight supply, which I would encourage them to do so, particularly around rare minerals. And, we've got issues around nickel and palladium and also some agricultural products. So I would encourage that. But, what I see in the market is, we talk about tools and we talk about processes to make conscious choice. But what I see in the market is inventory is seldom about conscious choice. And that's really where we need to go. And I'm going to take Stefan's question, if I could, Jan, about is AI overhyped in terms of relevance to supply chain? When people ask me about AI, first question I say is, let's talk about what we mean by AI. We've got generative AI, which, is great for content. If you're building training materials, maintenance materials, or, product catalogs, generative AI is great for content. However, in the engines in supply chain planning, we're a long ways away from being able to use generative AI because generative AI assumes we know what good looks like. And, most companies don't. Most companies haven't typed their supply chains and driven a clear answer around what is supply chain excellence. So when you have a technologist come in and talk about generative AI in an engine or a model in supply chain planning, I'd show him the door. Now, if you have narrow AI, which is a bounded model, which is working on machine learning in a known data set, I'm a big proponent of narrow AI, particularly as it ties to the graph. But, we've got all this hype cycle around AI, and we're not really appreciating the Web 2.0 technologies of the graph and unstructured text mining and sensing off of streaming data, but yet we're in love with AI, and it's just crazy. So, I hope that helps. And the other question, if okay to take it, Jan, is S&OP needed in retail and wholesale businesses? Absolutely. And the reason is that if I'm a retailer, like a fashion retailer, I've really got to be very careful in these recessionary, inflationary periods to be able to manage inventory and to be able to manage lead time, particularly with lead time variability. I worked with a very large luxury handbag company before the pandemic, and they had horrible inventory and they didn't have S&OP processes. And I was training them on S&OP, and they're like, you got to understand, Laura, we don't care. We just throw them, away. If we don't sell them, we throw them away. But, during the pandemic with the high variability, they went bankrupt. And so the management of cash and the management of turns is essential for retail and wholesale distribution. And so it is not just a manufacturing process. So I think that we've run out of time. So I don't know, Jan, guide me. What should we, any more questions?
if people want to ask more questions, this is the time. So we have a couple of minutes left. So I will open up a next poll, and it's about the are you satisfied with your current S&OP planning tool? So you can start to vote on that one right now. A couple of seconds it will be open. And after that, we have a couple of thank yous. So Jurgen, if you can move to next couple of slides. So Q&A we had, and maybe this one, Lora, this is your slide, and there's one more slide from you on the survey I think you have.
Yeah, I would love to have people answer my survey. If you like my research, you like my blog, I do have a survey in the field about what is the value of a network, and maybe you could drop the link into the chat. But I just really try to give back to the industry, and so you give to me and I give back to you.
Okay. With that being said, let me check one more time the Q&A. No more questions from the audience. So I want to thank you, Lora, for your wisdom, Jurgen for the demo. And I want to thank all who attended this webinar. And what we will do afterwards, we will reach out to you by email and share a link to the recording of this webinar, so you can share that with anyone within your organization who might be interested but could not join. So, and if there's anything that you want to ask after this meeting, please reach out. Our credentials are on the last slide. So you can reach out to us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And we will share the link to the survey from Lora in the email as well. So that will be shared in the email in the next couple of days. Let me no more questions. So I think we round up with that. Thank you all
there is still one question. How to deploy S&OP?
How to deploy S&OP in small companies. I think what you got to do is similar to a large company, is you've got to say, what is supply chain excellence? What is my lead time? Because S&OP should be driven outside of lead time. It should be managed by a profit center manager. So where does the P&L come together? How do I start the process of looking at the channel drivers to be able to get a good demand signal? What is the role of the budget, which you never want to tightly integrate the budget to the S&OP, because the budget's always out of date when you first start. And then you want to start modeling demand and supply and try to drive alignment. It is not as important to be accurate as it is to drive collaboration and understand the boundaries of what I call the effective frontier, because what you start to see through your modeling is the trade-offs between demand and supply and where you have constraints. And so getting visibility of that across the organization as people understand the trade-offs between cost and growth and inventory and assets, because it isn't just as easy as trade-offs between orders and inventory and customer service. It really, in cost, it is a more comprehensive issue. So start small, start with tools like this one that we're talking about here, and focus on how do you make better decisions? What is a good decision, and how do you make a better decision? I hope that helps. Any more questions, Jurgen?
Nope. It seems to be the last one.
And I would just add, I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody has a question, because sometimes people are, hesitant to ask it in this forum, send me a question on LinkedIn. I answer everybody's question. That's actually how I hooked up with Jurgen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you again, and everyone else, have a really nice day and enjoy what's left of it, and see you soon.